Jessica was appointed as Programme Manager for the Environment Agency's Plastics and Sustainability team in 2018. The team runs programmes with communities, businesses, government and schools with a vision to make plastic pollution a thing of the past. So Jessica, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name's Jessica Hickey, and I work at the Environment Agency. Our team is a very, very new team. We were set up earlier this year, and our aim is to make plastic pollution a thing of the past. And we're doing that in a whole host of ways. I think a lot of people now are quite aware of what the issues with plastic is. It is a growing trend. There are 8 million tonnes at the minute of plastic waste that enters our oceans every year. If you have a look at this graph here, this is the world plastics production. In 1960, 8 million tonnes of plastic globally was produced. This is now the amount of plastic that goes into the oceans. You can see the trend, it's increasing. We're now on about 310 million tonnes of plastic produced every year. So it's trying to think about where we might be. There's estimations are saying that in 10 years' time, there'll be 3 times more plastic in the ocean than there is today. And this, of course, it's a huge problem. We're not completely against plastics. I'm very passionate about plastics. I've been working in plastics since 2009. I was asked to do some research for a film called A Plastic Ocean on the human health effects of plastics. I've been researching this for a long, long time. And we're not completely against plastics. It's an incredible resource. It's lightweight, it's cheap, it has a huge amount of applications. It's revolutionised the health system, it's cut down on food waste. But 50% of it is produced for single use. There's a magazine, I don't have in this presentation actually, but I think it's 1955, American Life magazine produced this article, and it was, I think the title of it was, Throwaway Living, Never Do Household Chores Again. And there's a black and white picture of a family throwing all their crockery and cutlery into the air because they don't have to do washing up anymore, because this new substance, plastic, has come and it's going to change their lives. And it did make, everything a lot more convenient. But we've developed this habit, really, this lifestyle of using something. Half the time we use it for 12 minutes, and then we throw it away. And this plastic is designed to last. It's durable. It doesn't break down by microorganisms. It breaks up into small pieces, as I'm sure lots of you will be aware, microplastics. And every single piece of plastic ever made does still exist in one form or another, unless it's been burnt. There was a really interesting documentary done called Secret Life of a Landfill, which I found really interesting. And as they're digging up over the different decades, they're bringing up things that were buried back in the 80s, the 50s, and the 60s. And it's exactly the same as it was when it was first buried. It hasn't gone away. So, it's something we can't really be ignoring anymore. Lots of you will be aware of these environmental effects. We found plastic absolutely everywhere. Initially, the research started off looking in the oceans, and now we found plastic in the bottom of the Mariana Trench. We found it in the Arctic, in the Antarctic. It is absolutely everywhere. 660 marine species have been documented to be affected. I mean, every time you do more studies, you'll find it. There's one done last week in Scotland that said that starfish off the coast of Scotland have been consuming plastics for 40 years. It's not surprising. It is absolutely everywhere. And the more we look, the more we find. Some of these issues are really quite clear. These images you might be familiar with. The top image there is of a turtle called Mae West. She was found in America. As a hatchling, she swam into the ring that you find on the top of your plastic bottles. And it's so incredibly strong that she actually grew around that ring. That's now been removed, and she has recovered, not fully, but she's quite grumpy, as you would be if you'd spent most of your life inside a ring. But she has recovered to some extent. This is something we see quite regularly around our areas as well. And of course, abroad, entanglement. But also, you can see, this happens, we can see these, but actually if you look down the microscopic level, entanglement by things like microfibers that come from plastic clothing, which a lot of us, it's very difficult to avoid. There's actually plankton getting entangled in microfibers. So this is happening at a grand scale, but also in a microscopic scale. It is absolutely everywhere. Again, you might have seen drowning in plastic. This is a very familiar image you might see. 1 in 3 seabirds directly feed their chicks plastic. So the parents are out going on, across the oceans, swooping up whatever's floating it looks like something which is, you know, really good to eat. It actually smells like it because plastic can be floating about in the oceans for, I'm going to say decades, because it was, you know, the first plastics were produced in the late 1800s. It's swirling around in the oceans, and it picks up microscopic organisms, which it then is covered with. So it doesn't just look like it, it also smells like it. So a lot of mistaken identity is quite a big problem here. And you see, you know, cigarette lighters, you see quite a lot of, you see a lot of pen lids, and you see a lot of bottle tops as well. So not only do these birds die because they're starving, because they think they're full, they also die because of infection. So bits of plastic will be cut through the gut, and then of course that will cause infection. So really, really unpleasant. And we've just been given some birds actually that were caught in a net. Here, there's not a huge amount of studies that's been done on plastic in birds in the UK, but we're going to be looking this month to have a look to see if there is, you know, this problem is happening so much here as well. Toxins is an area of research which there's a lot of work going on at the minute. Plastic is, it absorbs chemicals, so things like DDT, things like persistent organic pollutants, which are linked to health problems like endocrine disruptors, so problems with your hormone systems, can cause cancers and affect your immune system, and a whole host of diseases actually concentrate themselves on plastics. So as plastics are floating in the sea, these chemicals are attaching themselves to them, and these chemicals move very freely from inside organisms, like plankton, for example, will then get eaten by larger organisms, and these chemicals can move into the body tissues of these organisms. Some studies are showing that these are very unsafe. Other studies are saying they're not. So there's a lot of research still being done. At the minute, we don't really know whether all this plastic is causing us a huge amount of issue in terms of our health. There was quite a grim study done that's published last week, showing that not just plankton, not just birds, not just marine animals, but actually plastic has been found in human waste as well. And not just PET, the ones from water bottles, but actually a huge range of different plastics, from clothing, from bottles, from anywhere. You know, plastic is everywhere, and it is actually ending up inside our digestive systems as well. So plastics is also, you know, linked to climate change. It's a crude oil. Plastics, you know, there's a study done recently, earlier this year, about as it degrades, as it breaks apart, it releases carbon dioxide and methane as well, and other greenhouse gases. 2 billion people in the world don't have access to a waste management system like we do. So a lot of this plastic will, you know, to get rid of this waste, will be put into rivers and off into the sea to degrade, releasing gases, and also a lot of it is burnt. There's a lot of island communities, like for example, you know, in the South Pacific, where waste management isn't something they have access to, and they have this huge problem with plastics and how to get rid of it. So they use it as fuel, so they use it to cook with, and not only is this releasing harmful gases and dioxins, which gives them respiratory diseases, but also, of course, releases carbon dioxide, which again contributes to global warming. So we have this problem, we have this huge amount of plastic that really we need to be thinking about reducing. And I mean, that figure, 13 billion, I've only seen that in one report. I think people have a real job to try and get an accurate figure of how much this in our environment actually costs, in terms of cleaning up, in terms of broken equipment, loss of revenue, tourism, etc. So it is a growing problem. I've shown you that graph before, but 80% of plastic in the sea actually comes from land. So these are this illustrates the different pathways. There's a lot of microfibers come from washing machines. Lots of things that shouldn't go down the toilet do end up going down the toilet. And you know, things that blow up into drains, get washed down to drains, into rivers, into the sea. And you know, all water systems end up in the sea one way or another. So it's not just people like us who are lucky enough to live by the coast. It's, you know, it is everyone and everyone's problem. So back earlier this year, we started a team in the Environment Agency. We are 6 of us at the minute, so we're a small team. However, we'd like to say we have 10,000 people in our team, because 10,000 people work for the Environment Agency and are all quite keen to be involved and do something about this. We work in 3 different areas. So we do a lot of work with outreach, a lot of work with NGOs and with schools. We look at ourselves as a large organisation to try and become an exemplar organisation in terms of sustainability in our plastics, and we've done a lot of work there. And we also work with business and government in terms of communicating information, being there to advise, and also working with MPs to raise these issues and push those issues further forwards. So just going to give you a kind of brief overview of what our team is doing at the minute. So we're doing some work, for example, looking at agriculture and plastics. It only makes up about 2% of the plastics we find, 2% of the plastics being used. However, it's something that hasn't really been looked at so much before. Its plastic has been fantastic for the farming industry. It has huge amount of benefits, but it's just thinking about, you know, what of those could we avoid? How can we maybe store plastics better to reduce it getting into the environment? And we're also looking at waste streams. We're thinking about when farmers are disposing of their plastic, well, what's the best way of doing that? What's going to happen to that silage wrap when it's been collected? So we, for example, a couple of our team have gone up to Wales recently, who followed a waste stream from a farm down here to the contractors that took it away, up to the next place where it was sorted, and then on to BPI where it was then sold on, where some of that's being turned back into new products. So just really understanding how the whole story of plastics, before it comes onto the farm, what's happening when it's there, and then where it's leaving. And like I say, we're working a lot with government. Yesterday and the day before, one of our team was speaking in Parliament in Westminster, working with Richard Thompson, who some of you may be aware of. He's done a lot of work with plastics, someone I've been working with for many, many years. And talking to the Women's Institute, who've got a big drive on at the minute about microplastics and microfibres in clothing. So a big stakeholder meeting with a lot of MPs and communicating a lot of information, looking at collaborative working in that area too. Internal change, this is thinking about what it is we're doing as an organisation. So it's really, you know, I hear people talking about, you know, I'm going to look at what I'm doing using a plastics lens. I mean, I've always got a plastic lens on, I can't help it. But it's about thinking about what people can do in your own business and your own lives as well to reduce unnecessary plastics. And I'm not talking about plastics that, you know, have a real value and a real place and a long term and have a really important use. It's about reducing. So, for example, when we go and do water sampling, we have a big litre to take our samples from for the bathing water qualities. Is asking those questions: do we need a whole litre of sample, or could we have half a litre? Could we have 10 mils? So it's just thinking things like that and that kind of detail. You know, we've also got an initiative going around our area at Manley House, where we've got a group every month, and it's not just our team, it's lots of people who go around just getting that environment a much nicer place to be. We did an event earlier this week as well where we had all of our field operatives. So these are people you might see who work for our flood defence team, who are looking after the riverbanks, and to do that they trim back all the grass to help with the water flow to reduce flooding. You're getting more and more plastics now in that environment, so it's about talking to them about telling us where there might be specific incidents of plastic pollution, but also they've changed their practice now. So when they're seeing plastics, despite the fact they're so busy, they're picking up as much as they can, take it back to depot and recycling it. So we held an event yesterday talking about the issues of plastic. We showed the film of Plastic Ocean. We did a lot of talking about some fantastic ideas they had to help them to reduce plastic as well and also remove it. So those are the kind of things we've been doing there. Outreach, we do a lot of work with schools, and we're developing a community toolkit. So a lot of people are already doing things in their community. I've met someone, where he is, earlier, who's told me to doing some amazing extreme beach cleaning, collecting areas. A lot of people are really busy in their communities, but they're doing it in their own time. So we are doing a lot of myth busting, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, and producing materials that people can use in the groups that we're already involved in to make sure that they're getting you know, really up-to-date information, giving the right advice about sustainable swaps, because sometimes they're not as sustainable as you might think, and raising awareness generally, and you know, coordinating a lot of work that's already been done, because there's such an incredible amount of work being done, and also going into schools as well. We're getting a lot of people asking us now to come into schools, and we also get a lot of people who work for the Environment Agency who are being asked to go into schools, so we're providing them for information as well that's linked to the curriculum, etc., that can be used. So what we can do as individuals, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle is something that's been around for a long time. It's just putting on that one before, and it's just, you know, reflecting or just evaluating what it is you're doing Can you avoid this item? Do you need to buy this? Could you reuse something else? This is something that when I'm talking to people in the waste industry, they're not always as happy as me talking about, because we're trying to reduce all the waste. But it is about avoiding what it is you can avoid, and then reducing, reusing, and then the fourth option is recycling. There's a big focus on recycling, and that is really, really important, but it is about thinking about what can be done before that. I'm just going to talk just for a couple of minutes about some myth busting, and the reason is whenever we're doing any community work particularly, these are the things people are always asking us about, and there is a huge amount of confusion over compostable, biodegradable and bioplastic. Does anyone have any idea about the difference between them? If I have a show of hands, if you think you have a good idea about the difference between some of them. One does, okay. Couple? Great. So, has anyone seen these plastic, not plastic cup? You seen them? You do see this quite frequently. And these are made from cornstarch, and it says they're 100% compostable and 100% biodegradable. So you might think that you can just put that in your compost heap. I would have done. Actually, it behaves exactly the same as plastic. It's not made from crude oil, but it still behaves exactly like plastic, and it can be composted in an industrial composter, of which there are 53 around the UK. Only 19 take hard plastics like this. This might be something that's suitable in the future, and in using the right way would be great. But at the minute, there's just a lot of confusion over it. The degradable bags are something that it was a pet hate of mine for quite a while, because they're green, they've got pictures of trees on it, and you think, great, well, I'll use this degradable bag. What it does is, in the polymers of the plastic, it has heavy metals, which is used by during respiration by microorganisms. So those long chains of chemicals are broken up. So microorganisms eat the heavy metals, which breaks up those chains, but you end up with microplastic. So what those bags do is produce microplastic just really, really quickly. So not really a sustainable swap, unfortunately, at the minute. So bioplastics, anything which is plant-based, this is where it gets really confusing. Anything that's plant-based you can call bioplastics. Anything which is biodegradable has to have microorganisms to break it down. And degradable and biodegradable is, again, where a lot of the confusion comes down by. So biodegradable is where it's been turned into, it's been consumed by another organism, which is what we want, really. And then degradable and compostable, again, not really straightforward, and even compostable, not really straightforward. I'll not expect you to, take in all of this or anything. I just want to show, just trying to illustrate that it is really complicated and really confusing by a lot of consumers, and something that, isn't maybe straight away the right answer. So just to be aware of that, really. And when there's so many people wanting to do the right thing and are really passionate about it, but it's so complicated and it's not easy to do. The right thing isn't always the obvious thing. So it's going back to that reducing. And these are the symbols. So this one over there, that I can't go over to the screen, but that one on the left of it is, you see that quite commonly. And they're the ones that are compostable, but need to be at 58 degrees and for 12 months to be able to be broken down, which my compost heap at home wouldn't do. And then the home compostable, that's great. Put it in your home compost, and that will, around 25 degrees, which is about the natural temperature of your compost heap, it will biologically compost. But yeah, a lot of work to be done. This might be something that might be available in the future, and we're looking into new innovative ideas, and some of you might have some, which we'd be really interested to hear about. But that's where we are with that at the minute. And the bags I've already talked about, because I do get a little bit excited about those ones. I've already covered that. But yeah, microplastic very quickly. So just be aware of those. But bear in mind, the people giving you out these, if you do see them, are probably really passionate about plastics and wanting to do the right thing. So it's quite a difficult one, that one. But just to be aware. This should be the other way around. This was I did a webinar for Royal Bank of Scotland recently, and they redid my slides to make them look prettier, but they put the waste hierarchy upside down, which threw me a little bit. But so we're working from down up. But in terms of, I was talking to businesses, this is the kind of questions you need to be asking in that order, but not, so you start from the bottom, go up. So it's about, avoiding it. What, can we rethink what we're doing, meet these outcomes in another way? How can we reduce it? It's about sourcing more sustainable options, asking people to take back their packaging, reusing your packaging. lots of things you can do. It's just about thinking about and having the time, giving yourself that time to reflect and evaluate how it is plastics are used in your everyday life and can you improve it in any way. So that's the end of that. And I'll hand over to you for questions. You got yours, okay, great.
Thank you, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, any questions? No, Chris Lorimer's got one. There we are. Chris, we're not going to pass the microphone, so just shout.
Yep.
Yeah.
First of all, can I say thank you very much, Karen Gallagher, University of Exeter.
Nice to meet you, thank you.
We're just about to launch our single-use plastic strategy.
Ah, brilliant.
And I'm very reassured to see it reflects quite a lot of what you're saying there. One question I've got, though, is
Yep.
what are the facilities in the southwest for dealing with plant-based plastics?
Well, I was at a facility yesterday in the energy resource facility, and there, I think in we can't just talk about the southwest. Every area is very, very different, and this again is something that we're working on to try and make more streamlined. I know that Devon particularly are trying to streamline a lot of how that waste is managed. There's not really an easy answer to that one, and it will depend specifically on where you live. So you'd have to look at your area, where you live, and ask them. So. Okay, well, I'll get your contact and I'll have a look at that for you. Okay.
Chris, you have a question?
Hi.
Hi, Chris Lorimer, Southwest Road Service. We work with a lot of organisations and companies, and a lot of them share your passion for reducing plastic use. What would you say is the first best thing they could do when they think they want to move into an initiative like this?
Well, really, it's just following that waste hierarchy, and it is first of all having some time to really put your plastic lens on, if you like, and really think about what it is you're doing every day and how you're doing things every day, and is there a way of doing that in terms of reducing single-use plastic. It might be cutting it out, it might be reducing what you're always using. So the waste hierarchy, I can give you that slide, but you can, it is freely available on the internet, just to really think about that. So in terms of what organisations can do, it is first having that time of setting aside that time to stop and think about it. When we're showing our some of our suppliers and our field ops team, for example, it's doing things to really engage staff is really, really important. So films like A Plastic Ocean is fantastic for that, because it shows that whole science in a really communicable way and talks about, really why it is we should be thinking about that, because not everyone will automatically get that. Lots of people will, but some people maybe haven't had the opportunities to really engage with that topic. So, engaging and motivating staff, I think, is really important. Having the time to think about it, work together as groups, and give people ownership over that, and get them to give you the ideas. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. One more question
Hi.
over here.
70% of the stuff I pick up off the beach is all fishing waste, and I'm not quite sure how we engage with the fishing community to try and reduce that. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. So engaging with the fishing industry is something that we are looking at the minute. Like I said, we are a really new team, so that's one of those problems we're not going to go straight in with, because there's so much going on, and there's so much independent, fantastic work done by NGOs and charities within that. And there's a big initiative called Fishing for Litter, which operates in Scotland and also down the southwest. But there's lots of other independent ones as well. We're finding that some ports and harbours have facilities to recycle fishing waste and some don't. It'll depend on the fishing traffic, of course. It also depends on, in terms of beach plastic, it'll depend on the time of year and what fishing activity is going on at the time. In 12 months' time, I'd hope to have a lot more information for you about that. It's something that we have someone working on almost full-time now in our team, because it is a really important, it is obviously a really important issue, and something that we see a lot of down here, of course. So hopefully, we're hoping to improve that, and I know you've got a lot of knowledge. This is the man I was talking about earlier who does extreme beach cleaning via nets, so very interesting to talk to you if you've got the opportunity to.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
One more question, okay.
Within the environment agency, are you just focusing on the southwest, or is it a national?
Yeah, good question. I should have said that. So we're the only team in the Environment Agency. We're based in the southwest because that's where the funding has come to, and that's, we've got so much coastline. It seemed like a good place to start. But we work nationally. We have a national remit. So we're doing a lot of case studies down here, and a lot of learning down here to then go across and work nationally. But we do work, nationally with government and things like that, and national organisations. But we do a lot of our more community work, starting off here, learning from it, evaluating and improving, and then rolling out across the country. I said we're an organisation of 10,000 people, and there's so many people already doing so much that can then do some of our work out in their communities, but have a model and some resources to work from.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Jessica.
Okay, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then, so that was very interesting indeed. Highly alarming. There we go. Right, maybe the good side of plastics now. Dr. Don Wellings from SpheriTech Ltd. Don is, SpheriTech is an independent research, development and manufacturing company focused on developing novel and, innovative polymeric materials which offer wide-ranging application solutions to clients within the life science, research, biotechnology and healthcare industries. So Don, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Can I just say I'm being rubbish at timekeeping at the moment. Bear with me, will you?
I'll be okay.
Okay.
That was a very useful introduction to some of the things I'm going to tell you about today. So hopefully, if I press a button, we'll go straight onto mine. I don't know where that slide came from. Somebody else must have created it. But as you just heard, I'm from SpheriTech, a company based up in Runcorn in the northwest. I was up at 4 o'clock this morning to drive down here as a favour to an ex-colleague of mine, since I owe him many favours anyway. I'm going to tell you about the biopolymers that we're working with, but I'll give you a quick overview of some of the things and where we're coming from. A lot of the things we're doing are really to combat some of the things that you're talking about this morning. But just to give you some idea, oops, I've gone too far already. Seem to have lost some of the formatting as well now. Somebody operating from an Apple or something. So we're interested in biopolymer development, so we're looking at 3 Bs, biocompatible, biodegradable and bioresorbable. But I'll step back in time a little bit to explain where all these things come from. The slides aren't working too well. What is a plastic? It's very simple. It's just a chain of molecules joined together. These molecules can be organic, they can be inorganic too, but it's a chain of molecules. So what's the problem? Completely reformatted my presentation, somebody else. Apologies for that. The problem is you can't break the links in those chains, not in the environment anyway. The only way to break those links is to set them on fire. So this is a complicated process. I'm hoping my slides get better, and they're not getting better. What are the links in the chain? If we step right the way back, where do these things come from? If we start off, polystyrene starts off with styrene, which comes from the petroleum industry, ultimately. It's carcinogenic, and it's not sourced from a renewable facility. Polyethylenes, another common one in the environment. Again, carcinogenic, comes from the oil industry. Propylene, polypropylene, carcinogenic, comes from the oil industry. So the whole source of some of these plastics is just stupid. Why are we doing it? We don't need to. Go into a bit more sophisticated. Hydroxyesters, so polyesters, not quite so bad. A lot of the sources are from renewable resources, but they don't break down. Bisacids and bisamines in the nylon industry. Again, they're safe, relatively safe to people, but again, sourced from renewables, so at the end of the day. But where we start is we go back to amino acids, which are completely safe. We can't live without them. Sourced entirely from renewables, from plants, vegetation, so all readily available in the environment. So we can get rid of all these. We don't need those. All we need is amino acids. Link amino acids together to form amide bonds. You have peptides, proteins. We're all made up of polymers based on amino acids. Collagen is a peptide-based polymer that would fall apart if we hadn't got it, as you do if you get scurvy. But they're all made from amino acids. Amino acids, when they're together, can be broken down by enzymes. So the enzymes in the environment, they're in the sea, they're on the table, on the worktops, they're in our bodies, in most microorganisms, so you can break them down. So I'll give you some examples of the things that we're working on, which again come into the environmental side. There's a lot of companies out there still putting plastic particles into cosmetics and into home care products, and even in surface wipes. There's a lot of plastics in there, again causing problems with disposal. So what we've discovered is we can make things from entirely safe materials, and we started off with something called polyepsilon lysine. Polyepsilon lysine is a short peptide. It's about 30 amino acids on average chain length, and this is made on a multi-ton scale. It's actually a food preservative, so it's made on a very large scale. The company we get it from make 100 tons a month. It's GRAS approved, so it's approved in the US, approved in Europe. Originally discovered in Japan back in the 1980s, but by 1987 it was being produced on a multi-ton scale. So it's readily available, short peptide. So we're not talking about making complex peptides and proteins, we're talking about taking something that's commercially readily available. And we cross-link it with bis-carboxy fatty acids to make this sort of larger biopolymer-based material. Basilic acid is one of our favourites, which is obvious to me, but it comes from the brassicas in our diet. The main source of basilic acid in our diet is from rapeseed oil, which is in practically everything you eat. It's very difficult to avoid it. So everything we do is also done in water. So we prepare all of our polymers and wash them and clean them in water using simple molecules and simple chemistries that, again, done on a large scale. So these are some pictures of what our spherosomes look like. So each one of these microparticles here is 3.2 microns. Every single particle is exactly the same size, or we've been told anyway. Take these microparticles and you can put them into a hand wash. So if you put them into a hand wash, we put 0.2 grams into a 100 ml pot of hand wash. That picture at the top left-hand corner there is a controlled piece of pig skin. So sorry about the animal stuff in here, it'll get worse. The top right-hand corner is fluorescent spherosomes that have been put into the hand wash and then put onto that pig skin. Bottom left-hand corner, it's been washed thoroughly with water. Bottom right-hand corner, washed thoroughly with a shower gel and then water. So basically what we're demonstrating here, these microparticles from this hand soap stay on the skin. So this is quite important if you want to deliver things to the skin, but also if you want to maintain some activity on the skin. So bear in mind, these microparticles, when they get washed out into the environment, they're bioresorbable. They'll degrade naturally in the environment. So what's so exciting about these microparticles? In this particular case, these spherosomes that we have, they're antimicrobial. We had some independent work done on some multi-species biofilms, and it was predicted, of course, because they're composed of a food preservative, that they're going to be antimicrobial. So we had them tested on two mixed species biofilms by an independent company, and interestingly enough, as we expected, they're antimicrobial. So the biofilm 1, so that's a mixed biofilm, biofilm 2, gave 5 log and 7 log reductions in viable organisms. To put this into perspective, silver gives a 2 log reduction in the viable organisms. So they're several orders of magnitude more effective than silver. They're biodegradable, stick them in a hand wash, a shampoo, a deodorant, they'll stay on the skin for longer. Eventually they'll wash off. Can also be used to deliver other things. One of the things I'm quite interested in is using them to deliver vitamin B3, which also stimulates the release of defensins in the skin to give an additional antimicrobial effect. So, for people who are a bit squeamish, you might want to look away through some of these pictures. So going down the other side, our real focus is actually on the healthcare industry. So we're developing these materials for scaffolds for tissue repair, and some of the things I'll summarise as we go through. But we've been doing a lot of work on osteochondral repair. And for this, we have a porous version of the polymer, which is made up by using those spherosomes and allow them to fuse together during their formation. I'll show you some pictures as we go. So Proliferate is a porous scaffold for tissue repair. And what we've done here is we've developed it to optimise for osteoblasts, which is bone cells, and chondrocytes, which are cartilage. So we can actually grow these materials in 3D. So in order to do this, we wanted wide pores on one side, close to the bone, because osteoblast bone cells are much bigger than chondrocytes. We coated that side with hydroxyapatite, which is effectively what bone is made of. The central region is smaller pores for the cartilage cells, which are much, much smaller, about a third of the size of an osteoblast. So, we started some sheep studies. This is where you might want to look away. Unfortunately, if you want to go into man with anything, whether it's a drug, whether it's a medical device, you have to do animal studies. I'm totally against it, unfortunately, but there is no way around it. It has to be done if you want to get into man. So, we're applying for our first in-man studies, but the studies in sheep started back in March this year. And we started off by putting our material. This is our porous material. If you look closely, you can see it's made up of those little microspheres all fused together. So it's lots of pores. Cells can go into those pores and proliferate, which is why we came up with the name. But to take you a little bit further, what we have to do with the sheep, this is a standard process that's run internationally, is you take the sheep's knee, unfortunately, and you drill a hole in it, 8 millimeters diameter and 5 millimeters deep. Into that you put the cartilage repair material that you're looking to test. In our case, it's a piece of that polymer just pushed into the hole, and the sheep gets put back together and sent off into the field. There's lots of things happening in the field. So this has been done at Cambridge University. They're looking at the weight bearing on that particular leg, looking how quickly it heals, looking at the activity of the sheep. Sheep always meander around fields, but if they're in pain, they go in straight lines. So we're looking at a lot of things apart from just the histology of this. So we started off with 18 sheep on this project, and unfortunately, 2 of the sheep had a displaced kneecap. The Home Office rules on this say that you have to have the sheep sacrificed at that point if you get any kneecap displacement. So, like I say, unfortunately, 2 of the sheep had to be sacrificed rather early. But that gave us data early on in the process. This is from one of those sheep. This is the original cut you can see on there that was drilled in the hole. So this is actually after just 1 month of the polymer inside the hole. And we estimate, we could look at the depth of this as well, that we have more than 50% repair within a month. The study has now gone on, and it's now completed at 6 months in the original 18 sheep. They have now all been sacrificed, but across by the 3rd month of the study, the sheep that had the polymer placed into the hole were all put in full weight onto that joint. There were control sheep where they just drilled the hole, put the sheep back together, and then there's control sheep where we use a fibrin glue to put the material inside there as well. But where we just put the polymer inside the hole, we have complete weight bearing at 3 months, and that continued all the way through to the end of the 6-month study. So we're just doing the work on the sheep as we speak, and should have all of the results by the end of the year. But we already have enough data to take us into man early next year, and we're going into the veterinary industry also next year. So we have an interest in tissue repair. So we can make different versions of these polymers. 10 minutes left. So we can create a macroporous hydrogel. Again, this is the same base polymer. It's polyepsilon lysine, but it's cross-linked with subberic acid, another bis-carboxy fatty acid that's in our diet. So it forms a different structure. I can't tell you how we've done this because we haven't filed the patent on it, but we have some interesting pictures of making this type of pore structure. We can control the pores down to about 10 micron, up to about 0.5 millimeter. So we have good control over pore size for different types of cell and tissue repair. So just to give you an idea, we can cast this polymer into any shape you can imagine. So this is an earlobe, just as a demonstration that we can cast it. And the pores on here are about the same material that you've just seen underneath there, about 0.4 millimeter diameter. So you can imagine cells growing into this material and getting good vascularization in the tissues. We already have good results in sheep, in knees. We also have good results putting this material into the spinal cord of rats for spinal cord repair, which is another interest that we have. But our next focus is actually on bone repair. So we've just recently applied for a grant to look at this material for bone repair. We've done a lot of in vitro studies in the laboratory. It's very interesting material. It looks very much like decellularized bone in a lot of respects. And if you put bone cells on it, that's what you're seeing here. The blue stain there is the nucleus of the cell, and the green stain is around the cell wall. It's an actin stain of the cell wall. And that hole in the centre is just to demonstrate that this is the pore. So we're actually coating the material. This is within 48 hours of seeding the bone cells onto the material. So we have a good start for bone repair. So we have a grant application in for bone repair at the moment. But to summarise the things we're doing, we have an interest in personal care and home care products. That's more of a sideline, and we are working with other companies that are in this area. We have an interest in cartilage repair. Hopefully into man, the first work in man will be in knees, hopefully mid to late next year. So we'll see how it goes. Bone repair is our next target. We have a grant application in progress with Innovate UK to look at bone repair. If it doesn't work, if we don't get the grant, we'll find other ways of funding this, but I think it's quite important because we have some really good materials for bone repair. Wound dressings, I haven't mentioned this yet. We have a wound dressing. We made 450 of them, which will go into a clinical trial at Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham in the military wing, hopefully early next year. Some delays in the NHS, but hopefully that will start early next year. We also have a corneal bandage. So imagine this material as a crystal clear corneal bandage, just a contact lens material. And that is really an antimicrobial material, it retains the antimicrobial properties, but used as a corneal bandage for post-operative surgery, for corneal ulcers, etc., for that sort of thing. We also have an interest in sight correction. So if you think that another non-biodegradable plastic is a contact lens for sight correction, J&J produce AccuView, and 100 million AccuView lenses are thrown away every single day. So they have to go into the environment, creating microplastics. So that's me finished. Open for questions.
Thank you very much. Well done, Don. So questions then. So immediately, Morella.
Hi.
Thanks for an interesting talk. I was just wondering what given that it's made up of amino acids, is that right?
Yeah.
What the life cycle of that is? Can you 3D print it? And what's it replacing at the moment? Or is it plugging like a brand new gap in the market in terms of revolutionising
Well, what?
surgery?
Shall I just
What's
repeat
which-
that? Sorry, I'm supposed to repeat each question. I forgot last time, sorry. Actually, I can't remember what you said. So I'm not going to
Can you
repeat
do-
questions. I'll just ask you to speak up. So again.
Yeah, so given that this is made out of amino acids, what's the life cycle of the material? Can you 3D print it? And is it a brand new technology, or is it replacing something else?
Right, I'll start with the first one. In the environment, it'll be broken down by protease activity, so it depends on the environment where it's going into. If it's going into a body, it gets broken down by protease activity in the body, which is much, much higher than in the environment, of course. We are actually doing some studies that might give us some focus on the environment, but that's still ongoing studies by one of my colleagues in the room here. So we may get some data on that in the not too distant future. So those are for the materials that may go into personal care products, so home care and personal care, so hand washes and surface sprays. Can you 3D print it? We're hoping we can, because we just started off a PhD project at Liverpool University looking to 3D print cornea effectively to manufacture cornea in the laboratory using these materials, so to 3D print, to populate with cells for corneal repair. So yes, we believe we could. What was the other question?
Is it a brand new technology, or is it like in terms of the knee, plugging the knee, like is that currently, do they use plastic for that currently?
They do. Currently, most of the materials that are used internally in the body for regenerative medicine are plastic-based. So there's polyvinyl alcohols used in the knee, for instance, polyesters used in tendon repair. So yes, there are plastics used in the body. So these are biodegradable plastics. So in some respects, the idea isn't novel, but the polymer itself is novel. And as you can imagine, of course, it's patented. Yes.
Well, that's 3 questions in one. So how many others? Any other questions? Paul, you had a question, I believe.
Don, as far as wound care is concerned, do you want to say anything about collagen and the ethical implications of collagen and the necessity for replacement?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that sparked me off, actually, originally, is we were asked a while ago by a company in Denmark if we could make a patch that was non-animal derived, mainly because a lot of these patches and wound dressings are derived from animal-based collagen, bovine, porcine, particularly these days equine. But obviously, if you're making wound dressings out of decellularized tissues from animals, you're going to get some objections. So obviously, porcine is very fashionable, works extremely well, but of course it's not compatible with Islamic or Jewish religion. When it comes to beef, again, there's lots of bovine-based materials out there, which again have problems because of the Hindu religion. And then people started introducing equine, and the company we started off with Denmark were taken over by a Japanese company. And myself and Paul actually went to see a video over there. And they mentioned at the time that because of the rate of growth of use of equine collagen, there wasn't enough horses in the world to satisfy the demand. So these people were breeding horses in the US to ship to Canada just to slaughter them for the collagen from their tendons. So there's a really immoral thing going on here as well. So when we came across this idea, we made this material. Eventually it got dropped by the Japanese company, but it got me going, and I thought, let's go for low-hanging fruit, which is the wound care. So hence we started working on a wound dressing, and then got involved in cartilage with a company over in Sheffield. So it's sort of grown a lot now. So beyond that.
Just to add to that, there is a huge need for wound dressings for severe burns or diabetic ulcers, that type of thing. And when you've got somebody who's critically ill and they have to turn down the treatment on religious or ethical grounds, it's a real problem, because if people are severely burned, they are going to die if they're not appropriately treated, or have a very high likelihood of infection and death. So being able to replace animal-derived products with a synthetic product potentially is very, very valuable indeed.
We've spoken to clinicians in Manchester, Bradford and Birmingham, and all of them say that more than 50% of their patients refuse the dressings.
Well, one last question.
So just to clarify about the in-home use, you talk about personal care brands. So is this to replace things like toothpaste tubes, plastic bottles?
Not at this stage. It's more the components in the toothpaste. So we are looking at toothpaste as another option as well. But these are microparticles that go into the hand wash, not into the plastic bottles. We do have ideas around replacing some of those plastics as well, and we've been working with MMU on that as well, Manchester Metropolitan University.
Brilliant. Don, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so Dr. Mark Hennen. So you've got your slide up already. Thank you, Don, for that. So Mark's going to speak to us about how we can use data from the European Space Agency, Copernicus fleet of satellites, using novel techniques to establish the feasibility of observing floating plastic litter from orbit. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here today to talk on behalf of ARGANS. We are a Earth observation remote sensing company based down in Plymouth, and we've been using remote sensing or satellite products for really interesting projects regarding marine plastics. Okay. And one of the projects we've been currently working on is identifying marine litter in the Mediterranean Sea with the European Space Agency's current fleet of satellites. As you may or may not be aware, marine litter in the Mediterranean is a severe problem. It itself contains 4 times the amount of floating plastic than the more widely publicized Pacific Gaia, or North Pacific Plastic Island as it's referred to in most media places. This includes about 1.25 million fragments of plastic for every square kilometre, which is, you can understand, being a huge amount of plastic. The main cause of this is the highly populated nature of the Mediterranean Sea itself. It's more of an internal sea than it is an ocean. and therefore is surrounded by many urban and industrial centres, all of which contribute, as we've seen in previous talks this today, a large amount of plastic into the ocean, into the sea. It's estimated that in 2014 there were 247 billion individual fragments of plastic in the Mediterranean Sea at that time. This number is only increasing as well as we speak. Of those many pieces of plastic, 94% of them are considered microplastics. That is, that they are smaller than 5 millimeters in diameter. However, of the other last 6%, the macroplastics, those bigger than 5 millimeters, they contain around 70% of the total mass of plastic in the ocean. And obviously these range from plastic bottles, plastic cups, even as much as like car bumpers. You know, we can see those floating in the seas as well. Of these plastics, 68% of them are made up of only two polymers, polyethylene and polypropylene. And again, these are prevalent in things like plastic bottles and cups and polystyrene cups. Due to the shape of the Mediterranean Sea, not much of this plastic actually makes it to the major oceans. In fact, they have quite a low half-life, meaning that a large proportion of the plastics either sink to the bottom of the Mediterranean or end up on the beaches within 7 to 80 days. And due to the sort of touristy areas of the Mediterranean, we see a seasonal peak in the amount of plastic that's entering into the sea during the year. Peaking in summer as more and more people visit the beaches and therefore dispose of plastic waste. In fact, one study in northern Italy found on one beach in 1 year over 31,000 individual pieces of plastic. So what we're trying to do is use Earth observation data to try and observe these plastic pieces and try to aid in the clear-up operation before they pose a more significant issue going forwards. Until recently, due to the sort of large expanse of sea and the relatively small size of plastics, Earth observation data hasn't really been used in this area. However, due to the launch of new satellites with high resolution, this is becoming more and more possible. And one of our jobs is to try and determine how possible it is to do this. So the main project overview, as like I said, is we're using satellite data, but we need to find out where this plastic's going to be. And it's not necessarily very easy to spot. In fact, you have a large amount of ocean and relatively small amounts of plastic, which is kind of like a needle in a haystack. So what we are trying to employ is using things, social media, mainstream media, to try and identify where and when these large plastic events are happening. When I say plastic events, this actual image here is taken from a Twitter feed of a river in Beirut, in Lebanon, being completely filled with plastic and being washed down into the Mediterranean Sea itself. This is due to higher than normal rainfall amounts in the upland areas, spilling overland into open waste sites and washing all the plastic into the rivers. So once we've identified where and when these events are happening, we then start to use our satellite data to try and observe the plastic events. Once we've observed multiple of the events, we can start to train algorithms to identify the plastics routinely in satellite data. And then with employing ocean current models, we're able to track or predict where these plastics are going to go and where they're likely to beach, and providing a useful cleanup service. So yeah, sorry, that slide, that's the Sentinel-2 satellite we'll be employing, and there are already current ocean current models or surface current models that are in development, which we plan to use with the data. So, as I mentioned, we'll be using the Sentinel-2 data satellite to observe the plastic in the oceans. But before we can start doing this routinely, we need to employ a few training missions, find a few case studies where we can actually start to tell the algorithm what is plastic and what isn't plastic. Sentinel-2 itself is a relatively new satellite launched in 2016. There are two in operation, operating 180 degrees apart, so they operate in the same orbit, but together cover the Earth much more quickly. We can get a total Earth coverage in 5 days. So every 5 days we'll observe the same place twice. It's a multispectral optical satellites operating in 13 wavelength or bands, operating between the visible, which is what you and I can see with our eyes, so red, green and blue, to longer wavelengths, including the near infrared and the shortwave infrared. So I won't go too technical, but I'll go into more detail about those wavelengths later. But the near infrared and the shortwave infrared are, for us, one of the more important wavelengths that we're observing in. One of the major benefits of using Sentinel-2 is the high resolution. Up until now, freely available satellites didn't operate with such high resolution. There are satellites that offer much higher resolution, but the 10-meter resolution of Sentinel, so every pixel being 10 meters by 10 meters, is very useful for trying to find these plastic rafts, which you may have seen publicized in media. Sentinel-2 is fundamentally a land-based satellite, but it also covers the coastline up to 20 kilometers off the coast and all islands within that area. Luckily for us, the Mediterranean Sea is so narrow north to south that it's not worth them turning the satellite off going out between the two land surfaces. So in fact, it actually monitors the entire Mediterranean Sea. So that's the satellite, and we've found multiple case studies looking for plastic training sites, one of which is in Dhaka in Bangladesh, which has a widespread problem with plastic waste. Most of the plastic waste that is causing the issues is actually imported waste that is imported from other countries to deal with their own waste problem. And often large amounts of this plastic is either just left on the surface or ends up in their rivers and water bodies around the city. In the bottom image, you can see that this is the Baraganja River, and just to the east of it, if you can see that red box, it's not very clear on there, but is a small kind of reservoir or pond, which is frequently collecting plastic waste. And if you can see the top image, you can see, depending on the wind direction, the plastic will just end up resting across one of the shorelines. So we've observed this area, Sentinel-2, and we can clearly see the plastic area in that. And once we've got that data, we can start to run some more analysis and try to determine how plastic differs from other things so that we can routinely observe it in our satellite data. And to do that, we obviously have to look at what other things are. So the objective there is to differentiate floating debris from common water surfaces. Okay, so we're not going to be looking at urban areas, but main things we're going to be focusing on are water. How does it differ from open water? And how does it differ from floating vegetation? And in this case, algae or seaweed. And we can see there's some clear differences. So on the plots on the left-hand side, you can see these are the wavelengths that we're observing in Sentinel-2. With the ones to the furthest to the left being the visible wavelengths, what you can see with your eyes. And then as we go further to the right, they're the longer wavelengths, where we're going into the more infrared thermal kind of wavebands. And we can see that the green and sort of slightly lighter green, they're the vegetation ones. And we see this very distinctive peak in the near infrared, so around 865. This is commonly referred to as the red edge. It's usually how a lot of agricultural remote sensing is done, because we can see they have a very clear distinction between the red and the near infrared. For our litter, we can see there are also peaks in the near infrared, but nowhere near as to the same level, same degree. But importantly, litter frequently appears higher in the visible red. So in visible red, we reflect more radiation than vegetation. So that's our distinctive point there. For water, we just see that with wavelength, so as wavelength increases, the amount of reflected radiation reduces. So that's quite easy for us to differentiate between water and plastic. So the biggest one is to try and differentiate between it and floating vegetation. So that's some of the stuff we've already learned from previous studies. Going back to the project in the Mediterranean, we started about 2 months ago working on this project, and we've already identified a few case studies for us to start investigating to try and find some case studies. A lot of these are related to high storm events. You may have already seen in media recently. There's been incredible amounts of rainfall in the Mediterranean, even called the Medicane, when we had a sort of hurricane in the Mediterranean Sea. And these high rainfall events are what we're trying to focus on to try and determine these kind of large amount of plastic being washed into the ocean at one time. Obviously, going forward, we'd like to be able to identify more kind of a continuous amount of plastic going into the ocean. But to train the algorithm again, we have to find these big case studies. So going back to the Beirut case study. So this was the Twitter feed that led us on this trail. There's only one main river that leads out of the Beirut itself, which is sort of towards the northern shore. But when we looked at the Sentinel-2 image around the time of this, we managed to identify some clear sort of features on the surface just to the west of the city. And when we looked a bit closer, we can see that there's these kind of rafts that what we'd expect as the flow of plastic goes into the ocean. It tends to get stretched down to these elongated kind of features. And then we can do some analysis. We pull the reflectance values from those pixels and start to compare it to other features. And we can see that in the top plot here, that it has the red line as the target, so what we think could be plastic, and the blue line being any open water around it. And they are very similar, which is kind of a flag for us. And we actually recognize we've seen this kind of pattern before, because another feature we have to look towards is sedimentation of the water, and how that might affect how that may look compared to plastic. So in this case, we're able to identify this as more of a false positive, okay? Because this is a very challenging new research that we're doing, and we have to look out for things that potentially could be plastic and which ones can't be. So again, for this case, we've identified that this was more sediment. Again, when we've looked through more storm studies, again, during the last few months, that a large amount of the features in the ocean are, in fact, sediments and not plastics themselves. However, we have been working with the University of Cadiz as well, and they've been running these survey missions where they've been taking their ships out into the low coastal areas around the Marbella coast in southern Spain, and logging where they spot large amounts of plastic floating in the ocean. Those circles indicate the size of the raft in which they've spotted. We've taken a Sentinel-2 image from exactly the same day and plotted the points of where they've done their surveys, and we've identified again a few other sort of spots. When we've run analysis on these sites, we've seen that when we look at it in the visible, so this is the middle plot on the left-hand side, that we can identify that there's a feature there. We can determine that. We've run further analysis on the bottom plot there, which is basically looking at sort of the NDVI, something that we're looking at that peak in reflectance that we saw in previous slides, and this identifies if anything's floating. And we can see that there are some areas floating. But then when we run our further analysis, looking at the visible red and all that we've learned, we can see that the very center of that line of feature on the surface, there's like 3 or 4 pixels, which are highlighting to us that that's plastic. This is indicating that, in fact, that this plastic is on the ocean there, but also that it tends to collate. It doesn't appear solely as plastic. We actually get to find that it sort of floats with vegetation and other materials, but we can clearly differentiate those to the plastic in the center of the raft there. Going forwards, like I said, we're at a very early stage of this project. It is a very challenging project to take on because of the coarse nature of any satellite observation and the relatively small amount of size of plastic. But we are looking to improve our algorithms, our detection process, by firstly identifying more case studies. So again, we're just constantly scanning for media posts, also working with our partners around the Mediterranean Sea who are out there looking for doing surveys. We're also employing local fishermen to report when they're finding plastic pieces or large plastic pieces, which we then go and research. But we're also doing our own experiments. So we're working with the University of the Aegean in Greece and creating some artificial plastics and pushing them out to the ocean, into the sea. Obviously, we're not leaving them there. We're going to take them back. I don't want to create any more problems. And then once we know that we can start to use Sentinel-2 data, and you can see the middle plot there, we already ran some experiments. And we can create these artificial targets and draw our own data from these analyses to again improve the processor going forward. Once we have more of these case studies, we can start to verify and validate our results and determine how good this process is going to be. And then with the use of marine litter, with ocean models or surface models, we can start to determine where these plastics are likely to go, and give like an early warning system if we have these sort of large beaching events where you get a large amount of plastic appearing on the beach at any one time. And that's me. I think I'm a bit soon, very quick that one, but any questions?
That's ideal. That's bang on time. Well done. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, then questions then. Paul, straight to you.
Mark, with a 10 metre pixel resolution, what's the realistic size of a raft you're able to pick up?
Well, I mean, it's sort of, you would tell you that you need 10 metre by 10 metre minimum. But when we can see in this previous example that these rafts themselves are actually 10 metres by 10 metres. But you can't really see because it's quite small. But in the Twitter image, you have three targets. Those are actually 4 by 4 pixels. So in fact, you don't need to cover the entire pixel for it to pick it up. You could probably need about half that. So if a 5 metre by 5 metre raft, you could detect it in a Sentinel-2 image.
That's when you know where it is. If you're doing a regular scan, are you likely to pick up something that small, or are you, in realistic terms, going to be looking for something that's 100 metres square?
Of course, something that's bigger will stand out more in the analysis. Like I said, the more we train our algorithm, the better we'll be at detecting the smaller pieces as well. So again, it's like any kind of machine learning. The more case studies you apply, the better the machine learning is going to be.
Yeah, no, so I wasn't criticising.
No.
Paul, criticising. One more.
Why is this important? I kind of like, I feel like I know the house is on fire.
Yeah.
Can I just repeat that? The question was, why is this important?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the marine litter issue is becoming a very prevalent issue at the moment. It's very popular in media. The main issue is because once we can actually start to be more effective at cleaning up the issue. Once we can, for the Mediterranean Sea, the issue, as I mentioned, is that it beaches. A lot of the plastic will end up washing up on shores. And whilst people will go out and do cleaning, if we start to be able to predict where it's going to go, we can more effectively plan these cleaning operations. And also, once we've started to spot it in the ocean, we can start to track it and we can start to model it. And we can determine where the plastic issues are most likely to come from and where they're most likely to go and which areas are most likely to affect. So again, it's just adding our bits towards solving the plastic pollution problem.
Question from Mr. John Lewis, never undersold.
Can you combine this Sentinel-2 data with any other data from other satellite data or whatever, whether it's positional observations in different kinds,
Yeah.
or perhaps, I don't know, ocean currents or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. We are looking at VHR, which is very high resolution data. As I mentioned, we have 10 meter resolution with Sentinel-2, and Sentinel-2 is very good because it's freely available as well. But there are more commercial satellites out there that are offering sub-meter pixel resolution, which obviously then, back to your question as well about how big the size of the thing has to be, you can find much smaller targets. The issue then is the amount of data. So there's the high resolution, the more pixels, the more data storage you're going to require, and the more data analysis you're going to need. So again, it's just about focusing how we can do these things. We also looked at looking at drone data as well. So in the southwest here, with the marine litter pollution problem is not as large scale as some of the things we might see in the Mediterranean or in other parts of the world, but we still have an issue. And if we can downscale this technology into things like drone surveys, that again will help to sort of identify plastic where people may not be looking, on cliff edges and such like this. So this data should be, if you have the same wavelengths, applicable to multiple different sensors.
One more question, gentleman there with the hand up.
What's actually being done with this data? Are you sending it to people and then they're clearing it up, or is it just
At the moment, we're obviously very early stage, so we don't have an operational service. But once we do, this is the kind of service where we should sell to like local councils or constituents who can then go out and clean this stuff up, effectively. There are other commercial entities as well that are interested in cleaning out the plastic. I mean, the Pacific Gyre is a key example where there's already companies out there looking to try and clean up the plastic issue there.
Okay, so we'll wrap that up there. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark. Okay, our final speaker, who is already a hero of mine, I must admit, I can't believe what they're going to do. Kate Salmon, one of the team members of Row for the Ocean. Just to introduce, founded by Ross, Kirsty and Kate, the Row for the Ocean team will row 3,000 miles across the Atlantic to raise awareness of the ocean plastics crisis. They're doing that in December. And through their work, Surfers Against Sewage, they're also working to create a plastic-free ExIST by 2020. Well done, you.
Thank you very much. Yep, so I'm Kate, so I'm 1/4 of the team. Oh, thank you for my name. I didn't put that there. Yeah, so I'm 1/4 of Row for the Ocean, and we're a team of 4 women. And I can say now, as of today, that we are setting off this month to go to the Canary Islands on the 28th of November, and we'll be starting our race across the Atlantic on the 12th of December. So this is the team. So obviously, I don't know if this is working. Okay, so I'm on the far left, and then Laura's the one standing up, and then Kirsty's in the middle, and then Roz is on the right here. So us 3 sitting down at the front, we're all from Exeter. We all met in Exeter Rowing Club a couple of years ago. And then we met Laura a bit later on. We decided, so Roz on the right-hand side here, she asked me and Kirsty if we wanted to row the Atlantic with her over a drunken text at Christmas. And yeah, I was in the pub at the time, so I was like, yeah, of course. It just seemed like a good idea, and obviously we've got a good cause behind why we're doing it as well. And then we met Laura a bit later on. She did social media for the boat builders who make these ocean rowing boats. And she's wanted to row the Atlantic for a few years. Her team dropped out a few years ago, so she was hanging around waiting for the right time, and then we came along. So I work at the Met Office. Kirsty is a landscape architect, and Roz is a physiotherapist, so we're all quite different. All bring different skills, but more importantly, we've had to do this around our day jobs, so that's been quite a challenge to begin with. And this is the race that we're doing. It's called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. You may have heard of it or know someone who's done it in the past. It's an organised race, but it doesn't mean it's supported. So there is a vessel which sort of is tasked to look after the entire fleet, and there'll be between 30 and 40 boats doing it. But that boat could be about 500 miles away, so you need to be completely self-sufficient. You need to do a lot of preparation to know exactly how your boat works and how to fix everything. The route is from La Gomera in the Canary Islands, and it follows the trade winds across the Atlantic Ocean to Antigua, and it should take between 40 and 60 days to do. And we'll be doing this on a continuous rotation of 2 hours on, 2 hours off, continuously for 40 to 60 days. So you only ever get maximum 1.5 hours sleep at any one time. So this is some of the sort of way, this is the female team who won it last year from China. So as you can imagine, there's a huge amount of funding that's required to do this, and luckily these guys met a very rich billionaire in China who just sponsored their whole campaign and effectively paid for them to have time off, and they went out and trained, and they were semi-professional almost, so they really did very well. But our aim as a team, Row for the Ocean, is to win the race, so to beat all the men's teams as well, because this is obviously majority men, as you can imagine. There's not many female teams in the race, although this year we have more competition than ever before, so that's really exciting. We're raising awareness and money for Surfers Against Sewage, because as a charity that's based in the southwest and people who are passionate about being on the water, this is something that's very important to us. we wanted to support a charity which was at the forefront of changing attitudes about plastic, and we felt Surfers Against Sewage fulfilled that role. And as a legacy, as a team, we didn't want to just give money to charity, we also wanted to change Exeter and the place that we know and love. So what we've decided to do is make Exeter potentially the UK's largest plastic-free city by 2020, if not sooner. So it's quite a big task, but we've had so much support, like the Environment Agency, for instance, have come on board, so have the Met Office. I'll talk about that in a minute. But those are our aims. So I'll just quickly talk through some preparations that we've had to do for this race, and then I'll go on to talk about the charity and our plastic-free Exeter side. So as I said before, Kirsty, Ros and I, we met at Exeter Rowing Club, and we're traditionally river rowers. So this is what river rowing looks like. You're in this tiny little narrow boat on a very flat river, and it's all wonderful, and you go very fast. Whereas in the ocean, it's very different. That's our ocean rowing boat. So that, as you can see, it's got 2 cabins at either end. This one on the right-hand side is slightly bigger. We call that the bow lounge because it just feels like so luxurious when you're in it compared to the other end, which you can see is a lot smaller. And your legs have to actually go underneath the seats, so you can't actually sleep with your knees up, which can be quite claustrophobic. And then on deck, you've got 3 seating positions. So there are 3 positions there, but we'll typically only row with 2 people at any one time. So obviously a very different scene to rowing on the river, although here we were coming out of Exmouth, so quite often what we did on our training was we've all got full-time jobs, so we finish on a Friday, hoof it down to Exmouth, get everything ready, go out like just before dark with the tide, because you have to, if any of you are sailors, you know that everything is determined by the tide and the waves and the wind. So you really have to check the weather really, you have to really check all of that first, because quite often we've planned a weekend to go out and we can't go out because the weather's too bad, in terms that you get blown back on shore and it's potentially dangerous. Obviously in the Atlantic you'll have much bigger waves than you do at Exmouth. But yeah, so this was a lovely evening to go out, and we're just setting out into the mist and the dark. And we've had some really, obviously this summer has been glorious in terms of it's been sunny, the water's been pretty flat, which is lovely, but it doesn't really give you the best training for an Atlantic row. Actually, I did lie, Ali, this is a video. Shall I just go and press the button? Yeah, okay, I'm just going to run across the screen quickly. So I just wanted to give you, oh no, I'm really mucking up your video, sorry. I just wanted to give you an idea of the training that's involved in this, because everyone sees these pictures and they're like, oh, it's all lovely and you know, it's sunny. But this was a really particularly hard outing.
This may be the wrong time for a video.
Oh dear, this is not working.
36 hours, guys, how are you feeling? Their silence says it all. We've been slogging since 12 midnight against the current and the wind. And we're finally coming into Exmouth.
So, yeah, okay. Didn't work quite as much as I wanted, but never mind. Basically, with that outing, we'd been up since midnight because we had to have 3 people on the oars because we were effectively going nowhere. We were going against the wind and against the current, and we were going at 400 meters an hour. So we were fighting to stand still, and we wouldn't have made it in if we hadn't just kept going. So it's all about thinking about those strategies when you're problem solving, and you just have to commit to getting stuff done, which can be quite challenging. So while we're not on the water, we're training on the rowing machine. Quite often we're doing like 2-hour-long sessions on that, very low intensity. Obviously, can't beast it out for 2 hours, but we'll be on the rowing machine or we'd be doing weights. And at the moment we're still training a lot, but we're focusing on our core, and the main thing is to prevent injury at this late stage. We've also had to do navigation courses, so knowing how to navigate around the coastline, especially in the UK, is very important. We've had to do sea survival, so getting in the swimming pool, being in a life raft, and you really realise that life raft is absolutely last resort. They say that you should be stepping into your life raft. So your boat effectively should be underwater before you resort to that. And when you do this training, you actually realise why. You're in the life raft, you can't see anything, you realise how vulnerable you are, even in a swimming pool. And then last weekend was our final boat pack, so we had to pack up our boat with all the food that we're going to take. We had to put each of those piles as an individual day's worth of food. So like I said, someone earlier, I think it was you, Jessica, you said it looks like astronaut food. It effectively is like dehydrated packets of food. It's all very weight and calorie controlled. And that's what it looks like. It's me really enjoying that flavour, whatever it is. Yeah, so effectively you just add water to this bag and then you eat it. And actually we were looking at trying to find packaging which was didn't have plastic in it, because obviously being that our cause as well, but there just isn't any at the moment in terms of the stuff that's biodegradable, which wouldn't biodegrade in the boat while we were rowing, because it's very warm and humid when we do it. So that was one of the challenges we wanted to overcome, but sadly not been able to. There are companies who are investigating that. So some of the challenges we'll face at sea, so big waves. This is actually a video from the Indian Ocean, but I thought it'd be easier for you to see what it's like rather than a picture. So in that situation, steering is extremely important, because you don't want to get caught with your beam, like that's the long part of the boat onto the wave. You need to make sure you're going straight down it. Anyway. Also, you can encounter huge freight ships as you cross, so you have to keep an eye on that and have your radio on, make sure you message them. But quite often on the bridge of those ships there isn't anyone really listening, especially to like a little ocean rowing boat. So these guys, they've really panicked, and we get given flares to let off in emergency situations, but they forgot what colour flare to let off, so they actually let off a red flare, which meant that this ship thought that they were in trouble, so it came even closer. And they were really freaking out by that point, as you can see by their faces. But yeah, they were fine. Yes, this is a bit of a gross picture for this time in the morning, I'm sorry. But yeah, you have to really look after your skin and your hygiene. This is a picture of someone's hands who rode in quite a cold climate, so in the North Atlantic. And hopefully our hands wouldn't quite look like that. But it's one of those things that you have to keep on top of and make sure after every rowing shift, no matter how exhausted you are, you have to clean your bum and your hands, otherwise they get infected and that can lead to multiple problems. I don't know if you can quite see this picture. It's just to give you an idea of how we sleep. So that's Kirsty there lying down. So she's actually 6'2", so she does fit in there. That's the bow lounge. The other end is quite a lot smaller. I don't have a picture of it, but obviously in a storm we'd both be in there, and then Laura and Roz would be the other end, and you just shut the doors and just ride it out effectively. So you can be stuck in those cabins for quite a long time, up to like 36 hours sometimes, and yeah, so it can be quite claustrophobic, but it's not all bad. You do get some absolutely, yes, I mean, it's a real privilege to row an ocean. You get to see some incredible things that a fraction of people on Earth will have ever seen. Incredible sunsets. So that's actually over the Pacific. This is us in Exmouth, and we've had some lovely rows around the bay here. At night you get phosphorescence in the water, so when you dip your oars in, you can see all this sparkling in the water. It's beautiful. The stars are obviously incredible with no light pollution, and the sunsets and sunrises, of course. And then you might get some visits from wildlife, like dolphins, whales, some crews have seen, flying fish. They tend to like come up onto the boat and can slap you in the face in the middle of the night, which will wake you up. And they do say, like, if you hear something land, try and find it, because they degrade really, really quickly. And then obviously you've got rotting fish on your boat. It's not a great way. And obviously the finish as well is probably going to be one of the most unique feelings in the world. So I thought I'd just give you another little video about what the challenge is actually like. This was last year's one.
Get the trace down a little bit. We never thought we were going to do this well. Much more difficult than we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, so last year was obviously really quick because they had incredible trade winds last year. So they broke the record. 29 days is an amazingly fast crossing. Obviously we hope for that, but it was a very uncomfortable ride for a lot of the crews. Like, it was big, big seas. So why are we doing all of this crazy stuff? Well, as I said before, our charity is Surfers Against Sewage, and I've sort of mentioned a little bit about why that is. But one of the things that Surfers Against Sewage do is they offer this accreditation to cities and businesses who become plastic free in inverted commas. You don't have to get rid of everything, but particularly with single-use plastic, reducing or removing 3 or more items of single-use plastic. Mentioned that. So I could spout off hundreds of facts about plastic, but as Jessica's already mentioned, she's given a very good overview. But this is the fact that really sticks in my mind, is that when you really think about it, every piece of plastic ever made still exists. And the only way to sort of sort that out is to reduce our use of it and clear up the stuff that we've already produced. So as a crew, we'd like to leave this legacy of a plastic-free Exeter. So I don't know when we started it now, probably last year, end of last year, we started Plastic-Free Exeter, and we put the word out, and we've had so many people join our team. So we have a group of volunteers in Exeter who are really, really keen. And it's really good that they're there, because obviously when we go off and row for 2 or 3 months, they'll be there continuing this momentum that we've started. So as a team, Plastic Free Exeter, we want to make Exeter the UK's largest plastic-free city. And this involves engaging the City Council, which we have done, working with local businesses. So we need to get at least 40 businesses in Exeter on board to reduce or remove 3 items of single-use plastic. Go into communities and schools. So we've been given talks, for instance, to the WI. We're going and giving school talks as well. Having beach cleans and river cleans and engaging communities over that, and then forming a steering group which aims to bring about this accreditation of Exeter by 2020. So this is Kirsty here and this is one of our volunteers, Sarah, who went to visit Exeter Waste Facility just to see what happened to the stuff that we collected during a river clean. And this is us doing the river clean. So this was a couple of weekends ago, actually. And you can see, like, we put an event out on Facebook. So all of this is done on Facebook. We don't have a website for Plastic Free Exeter. Row for the Ocean have a website, but everything's done on Facebook. We make an event, people show up to it. It seems to work really well. People are really enthusiastic. And then we have like a WhatsApp group for our Plastic Free Exeter team and have regular meetings. And so we went to the council when they were passing a motion to make the Exeter Council buildings plastic free. So we went and sort of had like a peaceful protest outside, but everyone who went in was like, yeah, we're kind of voting for it anyway. You don't really need to be here. Like, oh, thanks, guys. Anyway, it got passed, so that's good. And then obviously Exeter University have signed up to the scheme as well, which is wonderful. So they're going to be one of our flagship employers. Alongside the Met Office, so that's where I work, and I've started a plastic-free Met Office team alongside some colleagues. So we had a stand in the street one day, but yeah, we're aiming to make the Met Office plastic free and have an accreditation individually. And actually we've just made Surfers Against Sewage our corporate charity for the next 3 years, so it kind of aligns really well with that. We've also done stuff at supermarkets, so in Sainsbury's down in Marsh Barton we did a plastic unwrap where we encourage people at the checkout to take their goods to one side and then take off all the plastic, which is unnecessary. We obviously warned the manager about it before. We didn't just ambush them. Yeah, and that went down really well, and people were really supportive about that. And then, yeah, as a crew, we've been going into schools, and obviously it's nice that we've got this row and the adventure and the challenge around that to talk about, as well as the plastic-free side, because that really is like a hook for the younger generation. And actually, as if many of you are parents, you might know that the curriculum's sort of starting to include stuff about plastic now, and actually we found the children to be very engaged, and that's really really nice to see. So yeah, they made some lovely artwork for us around plastic. Yeah, so finally, I guess I'm nearing the end now. This is our boat. We couldn't do this without this challenge that we're doing, without raising huge amounts of funds. So we've currently raised over £100,000 in the last year and a half, and we've still got the last little bit to go, basically. So this is the sort of outline of our boat. You can see all of our sponsors on here. I'm sort of plastered a little bit in some sponsors. But the race obviously receives a lot of media attention, as you can see from that promo video made by Talisker. We're one of the higher profile teams this year because Laura has worked in social media and she's having a little film made about her. So if any companies, anyone's interested in becoming a sponsor, then please come and talk to me. Individually, I'd love you to donate something if you're interested. So, oh, I don't know where my last slide was, but our website's there, A Row for the Ocean. You can go on there and there's like a donate button. So, yeah, lovely to speak to you, and thank you.
Brilliant, Kate. Thank you very much. Stunning. I'm going to ask the first question, actually. I know you work for the Met Office, but you said the hurricane season ends on November the 30th. How can you be so sure?
Yeah, so that's based on an average climatology of looking at hurricanes, and roughly the hurricane season, well, they say it's the 30th of November, but most hurricanes should be gone by then. They haven't had many hurricanes after that. So obviously there are still tropical storms that might come up, so or lows that might come down. So we've got a weather router who will keep an eye on us on that for us, and the Met Office are actually giving us some tailored weather forecasts. So yeah, we'll just have to, we know our boat has survived a force 9 before, so
I'm relieved about that.
We'll just have to ride it out.
So questions, and there must be a few, I'm sure. Mr. Lewis again.
Two questions about the boat. One simple one. Can you communicate between the cabins?
Yeah, so the question was, can you communicate between the cabins?
That's the easy question. The bigger question is, are all the boats very similar design? Or are there some novel designs of boats?
Yeah, so you can communicate between the cabins in that I've bought some Jurassic Park walkie-talkies that have dinosaur effects. Genuinely, that's what I've done. Yeah, because it's quite important, if you're in a storm and you're feeling isolated or there's something wrong, you need to be able to communicate without having to be on deck for too long. And the other question was, what was it? Sorry. Are the boats a similar design? Yes. Our boat is, there are two classes of boats. There's one called Pure and there's one called Concept. The Concept boats tend to be faster, and that's the one that we're in, so it has a slightly bigger bow cabin, which can catch the wind a little bit better. The Pure boats have a lower profile in the water, but in general design, they do have two cabins either end, and that's just, yeah, and the hull is the same shape. No.
There are no multi-hulls. More questions then?
Yeah.
Two questions. First one on the plastic for ExIST. Did you 40 companies to get the classification? How many do you have at the moment?
We've got about 10, I think. So I think, sorry, the question was, we need 40 companies. How many do we have at the moment? we have, the ones we have are quite big. So we've got the Environment Agency, Met Office, University, they're all ExIST's major employers. I think it will be quite easy to get on board smaller businesses, and that's our next step. So we're having like a talk in Finisterre in Exeter in January, and the idea before then is to target businesses and invite them to that. And
we're going for B Corp status, so we're a small business.
oh, nice. Yeah, come and get my card. Yeah.
The second part was, with the amount of plastic waste that you're taking onto the boat, you talk about the sachets,
Yeah.
do you have a waste management strategy? Because that's got to be, because we don't obviously want it blowing off into the...
Absolutely, yeah. So the question was, do we have a waste management strategy on the boat, given our plastic waste? Yes, all of those sachets are washed out, and then we'll like wrap them up with string. Basically, they'll be counted at the end because the race organisers have an obligation that they're not littering during the race. So they will make sure that you haven't just chucked stuff overboard. Anyway, we wouldn't do that, but just in case. And then because Antigua, where we land, is a very small island, and basically they have very little waste management strategy. I think they just take their waste out and they dump it somewhere in the sea. So we're going to take all of our waste back to the UK and then figure it out when we get home. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Any more? At the end here.
You mentioned if there's a storm, you have to go into the cabin.
Yeah.
Can you steer the boat from inside the cabin then, so that you can somehow ride out the storm? Is that
Yeah, so the question was, can we steer the boat within the cabin in a storm? So yeah, you can actually put, what we would do in a storm is we put what we call a para anchor out, and it's essentially a parachute that you put into the water that will stabilise the boat so you're never caught beam onto the wave, and hopefully wouldn't capsize necessarily, but you know, things can happen. But you wouldn't need to steer in that sense in a storm. If you're on deck and you're rowing, then you would need to steer, and we have foot steering attached to the foot plate, but we also have an auto helm, which is essentially a little machine. You can put it onto your rudder, put a bearing in, and that will keep you on the right bearing, so you don't have to worry about foot steering. But those are very temperamental and they break down quite a lot.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Right, more questions? One more from the lady here.
Hello.
This might be a really, really silly question.
Silly question
No such
coming
thing.
up.
Actually, see all the other boats as well. Do you know if you see the others?
Right, so the question was, can you see the other boats in the race? Well, that's interesting actually, Jill, because typically no, the race spreads out over a few miles, but as you can see from last year's race, the boats were finished within a few hours of each other, which is exceptional. And actually two boats last year formed a real nice friendship at the start line, and they kept in contact, and they were always within a couple of miles of each other. So one day they decided to meet up for breakfast in the mid-Atlantic. So yeah, they caught up and then they tied themselves together and they just had a good old chinwag. Because imagine not seeing anyone for 2 months apart from each other, and then as soon as you see another boat, you're like, oh my God, how are you? What's going on? And yeah, and I think last year as well, 2 boats finished within 600 metres of each other. So I can't imagine what it would be like to be the second boat in that. 600 metres after 2 months.
Wow, unbelievable.
Yeah.
There we are. Well, I'm going to wrap that up now for the
Okay,
4 speakers. We've
thank
got a
you.
few other things to do, but thanks, Kate. That was stunning. Thank you. Okay, there's a couple more things to do, actually. Charlie Molyneux is the coordinator for the Big Bang Fair, wants to talk a bit about the plans. So where's Charlie? There we are. Hiya.
Thank you. I'm quite in awe of what Kate just spoke about. I've quite forgotten why I'm here. So I work for CSW Group. We're an organisation that works with schools and businesses across the southwest. And I have the very exciting job of organising something called the Big Bang Fair. It's a national initiative led by Engineering UK in order to inspire young people about STEM. We hold the contract for the Southwest region, so we run events across the Southwest over the course of the year that invite schools to meet with different businesses, different companies and organisations that are that have STEM at their core. So our headline event each year, we attract nearly 3,000 students, but we're going to try and double that this year. We are kind of relaunching the Big Bang in Exeter. We used to hold it at the University of Exeter, but we needed a bit more space because we had sort of increasing interest from schools wanting to come along to the event. So we've now moved to West Point for next year. And how this event looks is a huge exhibition of companies all over the southwest. And our kind of requirement from the companies that exhibit is that your stand has to be interactive. So all the students have the opportunity to really engage and speak to the exhibitors by doing hands-on activities or seeing demos. We found this works really well, and actually a lot of our exhibitors have always reported that actually that hands-on activity has resulted in them having really meaningful conversations with students that come along. So in the main arena there'll be a large exhibition. We also have big science shows on the main stage, which involve me contacting the venue and finding out about their fire alarm system, because they're normally quite explosive shows. And we also have the regional heats of the Big Bang UK competition. So that is to find the Young Scientist and Young Engineer of the Year, and this year we will be finding the Southwest Young Scientist and the Southwest Young Engineer. So it's a really exciting event for both schools and employers across the region. Really, for what we're looking for is to next year, it's on the 25th of June, is to bring even more diverse range of employers to the event, and to really give that opportunity for educators and students to see what opportunities that there are within our region in STEM. So we've got a core group of exhibitors that tend to come along each year, and we want to kind of increase on and expand on that. Research shows that young people having meaningful interactions with employers, there's a direct correlation in the impact on their likelihood to go into work or training afterwards. And I actually met an example of this. I met a young 17-year-old woman the other day who's in an apprenticeship in a software industry, and the reason that she has actually ended up in that apprenticeship was because she came across and spoke to an employer about that line of work, and she was so inspired that she went on to do a kind of a school-related project, and then she ended up in the apprenticeship that she's in, and that was just from a really inspiring interaction with an employer. So that's what the event is all about, really. So ways you can get involved. We don't get much money. We get a grant from the Engineering UK to run our whole programme of events across the year. The grant that we get doesn't actually cover our main fair. We hold, as I said, we hold our main fair at West Point, but we've also got other fairs in this year. We've got West Point, in Weston-super-Mare, in Dorset, in the Tank Museum, and in another other venues across the southwest in order to reach the students right across the region. So that grant, as I said, doesn't cover our main event. So we need sponsorship in order to get this exciting event for the students. We're looking for exhibitors to be part of the Big Bang. And on an individual level, we host the regional heats of the competition. So we're looking for judges. So industry experts are our judges. So if you'd like to be involved in the day in that capacity, do come and speak to me as well. But any information that you want about the Big Bang Fair, there's a big sign at the back that's got our details on it. Come and talk to me, or just on the CSW website, or just Google Big Bang Fair Southwest, and you'll find all our details. But we'd love to have you all along. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you very much. I would just add to that, we had, for my firm, we're engineers, we design things for buildings. We had some girls in in the summer, just a week's work experience. They came in with no real idea of what they wanted to do for a career. They thought they were going to be hairdressers. They came in like little lambs. At the end, they went like lions, completely fired up because what we were able to do with them during that week. Just encourage anybody to do the same, really. Right, I'd also like to just, I've got no axe to grind, just heads up for the National Marine Aquarium in Plymouth. It's in Plymouth, but it is the National Marine Aquarium. Just please go and visit, go and see them, go and see what they're doing in terms of plastics, in terms of seagrasses, which absorb far more carbon dioxide than trees and other land-based things. So go and see them. They're doing some, I say, fantastic stuff on the plastics front. They had a crew member on the Tide on Plastic on the yacht that went around the world in the Velvet Atlantic Challenge. It didn't win, I know, but it's still a great thing to do, of a crew of amateurs. So there we are. So at that point, I'd like to wrap up the whole morning. Say thank you very much to our speakers. I think we're all fantastic. And the normal way, show our appreciation. And sorry, I should also say there's extra tea and coffee available if you want to stay around for a bit more networking. Thank you very much. Thanks.